The image is deeply embedded in historical memory. The gallant knight, his white garment adorned with a bold red cross, sword held high for divine purpose. He embodies the Crusader, the valiant advocate of Christendom, heading toward a far-off sacred region in pursuit of unwavering belief. Yet this radiant persona, symbol of steadfast devotion, remains a myth. The true nature of those who bore the cross was far more chaotic, intricate, and distinctly human. The force advancing east wasn't a unified band of holy warriors. It was a turbulent, disorderly flow of people, each driven by personal motives. Undoubtedly, belief served as a strong influencing impulse. Many were truly dedicated, faithful men who firmly believed they fulfilled a celestial directive to restore the sacred land for Christianity and thereby attain personal redemption. Yet devotion often accompanied other ambitions. The one who accepted the symbol was also the disinherited younger sibling, devoid of prospects to inherit ancestral property, who envisioned a chance to create a new dominion under distant skies. He was the experienced fighter, manipulated not by sacred ideals but by the allure of riches and unending spoils. He was the weary farmer, desperate to flee oppressive bondage or starvation. He was the rogue, granted complete absolution for his transgressions if he complied. And he was the impatient aristocrat, disillusioned by rural monotony, craving thrill and a path to renown in the most expansive theater possible. This was not a solitary band of pious individuals. It was a flood of belief, drive, hopelessness, and fury, converging on one far-off objective. To grasp the Crusader, we must discard myths and trace the genuine individual through his extended, merciless, and reshaping path to the east. The catalyst for the Crusades was a homily delivered by Pope Urban II at Clermont, France in 1095. His rhetoric, a fervent summons to battle for reclaiming sacred ground, swept across Europe, amplified by an exultant chant, Deus vult, God wills it. Nonetheless, for this summons to stir such widespread emotion, it required a broader appeal beyond spiritual motives. It embodied a harmonious spiritual storm, presenting a singular fusion of divine recompense and tangible prospects. The central and most compelling force was belief. To medieval thinkers, wrongdoing was an oppressive weight, a binding obligation demanding repentance, with endless suffering as the price of failure. The pontiff proposed an unexampled agreement. Those who carried the emblem and embarked on a campaign for the sacred region would earn total absolution for every misdeed. This marked a clever theological strategy, an unassailable assurance of eternal redemption with immeasurable worth. For a steadfast knight entrenched in carnage, this provided a fresh start, a definite route to assured liberation. Yet celestial rewards were offset by the temptation of material success. Medieval systems relied on inheritance rules where the firstborn claimed all titles, estates, and territory. The younger sons of the elite faced a constrained existence, lacking autonomy and resources. The East presented chances for warriors to establish dominion over territories or regions. Beneath the aristocracy, the chance for loot attracted many with ambition. Stories about the immense riches of the East, such as silks, spices, and gold, inspired both destitute knights and common folk. For many, the crusade represented a way out. In the 11th century, European life for the majority was a harsh cycle of exhausting work, scarcity, and minor regional conflicts. The crusade offered a possibility to escape. For a serf, it meant a way to flee from the territory he was tied to. For an offender, it represented a papal-approved reprieve. For a discontented spirit confined to a remote hamlet, this was an unparalleled expedition, an opportunity to witness the fabled metropolises of Constantinople and Jerusalem. Ultimately, for the military elite, the knights, it served as a justified objective. These individuals were conditioned for conflict. The crusade provided them with a sacred mission, redefining their martial abilities from a possible transgression into a devout act. It represented the final righteous conflict. Individuals from diverse backgrounds affixed the emblem to their attire, the pious, the fallen, the hopeful, and the ruthless, all united under a single standard. As soon as a soldier pinned the insignia to his gear, he felt a surge of moral clarity. Yet the early enthusiasm of the Exodus, accompanied by roaring cheers and sacred benedictions, dissolved under the first and most formidable test of the expedition, the arduous path ahead. This was not a casual journey. It was a relentless, over 1,000-mile trial that would dismantle resolve before any battle. Most participants, particularly during the First Crusade, traveled by foot. An army relies on its food supply, and this was a force comparable to a mobile city accompanied by a disorganized crowd of pilgrims, traders, and attendants. They constituted a sluggish column of people meandering across Europe's landscape. Their initial obstacle was the complexity of supply chains. How to sustain 50,000 individuals in a period without transport vehicles or preserved meals? The response was, you don't. Crusaders were required to procure or scavenge their sustenance en route. Scavenging swiftly escalated into looting. As this vast, ravenous force passed through distant regions, particularly Christian areas like Hungary and the Byzantine Empire, they were regarded not as pious saviors but as a devouring swarm, stripping all resources. Inhabitants would store their provisions and seal their entrances, sparking fierce conflicts. The trek transformed into an ongoing struggle for survival against hunger. The next threat emerged as illness. Thousands of individuals moving and living in cramped, unhygienic conditions led to widespread illness. Diarrhea, typhus, and minor infections spread rapidly in the camps, claiming lives without discrimination. The path to Jerusalem was marked by the remains of those who perished from fatigue, hunger, and illness. For the wealthy, especially during the later Crusades, maritime travel provided a swifter yet equally harrowing option. Soldiers, animals, and cargo were packed into the dim, malodorous compartments of merchant vessels during voyages stretching over many weeks. Navigators relied on the unpredictable forces of nature. Violent tempests might wreck ships on jagged shores, whereas extended stillness could trap them at sea until provisions dwindled. Nautical illness was widespread, and the cramped, unsanitary environment fostered epidemics. The voyage, regardless of route, served as a merciless trial. Most who departed from France, Germany, or England never reached the Holy Land. The individuals who eventually arrived at the Levant's coast were the remnants, battered, weary, and scarred by the trek. Following prolonged hardship, the Crusaders' arrival in the Holy Land brought not solace but a jarring revelation. The territory he envisioned, a mythic Eden filled with abundance, contrasted sharply with its unforgiving reality. The non-believers he sought to subdue bore no resemblance to the barbaric, untamed pagans portrayed in the impassioned sermons of his homeland. The initial and foremost challenge proved to be the weather conditions. A warrior hailing from the cool, misty woods of Normandy or the Rhineland found himself utterly unready for the scorching, unyielding heat of the Levant. The sun emerged as a tangible adversary, striking with an intensity unlike anything he had ever faced. Hydration, a common necessity elsewhere, became perilously limited. Dehydration posed an unrelenting, life-threatening risk, surpassing battle injuries as the primary cause of death. His gear, previously reliable in European conditions, now proved counterproductive. Wearing chainmail over soft padding felt like being encased in a scorching furnace, amplifying fatigue and misery during movement. Armored steeds, trained for aggressive charges on European plains, faltered under harsh conditions and struggled with uneven ground. Then came the sudden fear of hostile forces. The Crusader was informed he confronted heathen barbarians. Rather, he encountered the advanced, prosperous, and highly developed Islamic civilization. Saracen cities exceeded European settlements in size, cleanliness, and innovation. Their military units lacked disorder and randomness. They comprised trained, orderly troops commanded by capable leaders. Their fighters, especially the lightly armored cavalry archers, excelled in a swift, ambush-based combat method that frustrated and outmaneuvered the sluggish, heavily clad European knights. Ultimately, the unseen threat emerged: sickness. The Crusaders' immune system, used to European microbes, proved completely unready for the Middle Eastern pathogens and infections. Dysentery, typhoid, and malaria spread rapidly across the Crusader encampments. A minor wound or blister, often dismissed back home, might rapidly turn septic in the harsh, arid conditions, resulting in a prolonged, excruciating demise. This fell short of the land he once envisioned. It was an unyielding trial that would probe his endurance, resolve, and spirit in unforeseen ways. Warfare in the sacred region was a fierce, unequal conflict shaped by opposing strategies. The knight, molded by European tactics, wielded a towering fortified weapon. The Arab fighter was a refined, lethal blade with surgical precision. Their clashes, endured beneath the relentless desert sun, reflected a stark contrast. The core of every Crusader force depended on a decisive armored assault. A formation of warriors, encased in full-body armor, riding swift mounts and wielding lengthy spears, created a formidable display. As they surged forward, they transformed into an unstoppable tide of metal, engineered to dismantle enemy ranks instantly. In wide, unobstructed spaces, this method achieved unparalleled destruction. However, Muslim forces, especially the Turks and Egyptians, seldom allowed them to exploit it. Their key advantage stemmed from swift cavalry archers. These warriors were skilled riders, wearing minimal protection and wielding effective recurve bows. They avoided direct clashes with the Crusaders' onslaught. Rather, they encircled the sluggish Christian units, a frenzy of motion and dexterity. They surged forward, release a hail of arrows with lethal precision, then vanish before the knights launched their counterattack. This conflict drained resources through persistent harassment, forcing the Crusaders into reckless, hasty assaults that fractured their disciplined ranks. Encirclement strategies dictated the primary mode of engagement. The region was defined by fortified strongholds, their capture pivotal to securing supremacy over the land. The Crusaders pioneered the construction of colossal, unbreachable citadels. Croix des Chevaliers epitomized their ingenuity. Sieges stretched for extended periods, marked by intense violence and exhaustion. Crusaders constructed massive war machines such as catapults, trebuchets, and towering siege structures to shatter defenses, while attackers unleashed projectiles, stones, and the feared Greek fire, a fiery substance resistant to water. Combat was an unbearable torment for each warrior. The oppressive heat within the helm was overwhelming. Armor grew blistering when handled. Dehydration posed a greater threat than the opposing soldier. A mounted knight in full armor was frequently doomed once knocked off his horse, unable to rise swiftly and exposed to attacks from multiple foes. The risks were universal for all involved. Mercy was seldom offered, and post-battle scenes often depicted brutal carnage distant from knightly honor. The Crusades weren't a single prolonged conflict. Interspersed with extended intervals of tranquility, fragile ceasefires, and an unexpected level of cross-cultural interaction. Following the unprecedented triumph of the initial Holy War, the triumphant commanders did not merely abandon their campaigns. They lingered. They partitioned the captured lands and forged a sequence of distinct blended polities called the Crusader kingdoms, or Outre-mer, land beyond the sea. These domains, Jerusalem's kingdom, Tripoli's county, Antioch's principality, and Edessa's county, represented an odd yet compelling endeavor. Scattered remnants of European feudal structures existed within a sprawling Islamic expanse. A French or Norman noble, transformed into the Count of Jaffa or the Prince of Galilee, erected a grand European-style fortress commanding vistas of olive orchards and date palms, governing a populace predominantly composed of regional Muslims and Eastern Christians. Survival in Outre-mer required perpetual equilibrium. Crusader nobles formed an insignificant governing class, outnumbered by their populace. To ensure their realms endured, they needed beyond mere combat. They needed to manage, engage in commerce, and forge partnerships. A sophisticated yet unexpectedly practical society arose. Crusaders started incorporating certain indigenous practices. They came to value the enhanced comfort of airy, fluid Middle Eastern attire in hot climates. They grew fond of regional cuisines and seasonings. They relied on local artisans and architects, and even hired Christian and Muslim officials for their governance. Commerce thrived. Acre and Tyre, the coastal cities, evolved into lively commercial centers where Italian traders exchanged European products for Eastern textiles, spices, sugar, and glassware. At times, Christian rulers concluded agreements with Muslim counterparts, and caravans moved securely between Damascus and Jerusalem. Despite remaining adversaries, they coexisted as neighbors, intertwined through fluid alliances, economic ties, and shared distrust. However, this tenuous balance was constantly overshadowed by the threat of violence. The Crusader territories remained in a constant state of vigilance. The major military orders, such as the Knights Templar and the Hospitallers, formed the enduring trained core of the kingdom's defenses, manning the formidable castles along the borders. Life presented a jarring contradiction. A French knight could spend the morning bargaining with a Muslim trader in the bazaar, and the afternoon clashing with the same trader's relatives in a border conflict. This was existence at the borderlands, a simmering, dynamic, and inevitably failed attempt at cross-cultural interaction. Each traveler from Europe faced an irreversible spiritual metamorphosis. Their past self faded permanently. However, for most, this path also held physical permanence. Their return remained impossible. They perished from illness during transit, vanished in naval disasters, fell in combat, or succumbed to the East's oppressive climate. Vast quantities of European remains lay scattered along the pilgrimage route to Jerusalem and in the parched soil of the Holy Land. Yet a few endured. What lay in store for the Crusader who defied the impossible to return home? The outcome hinged solely on his status and past deeds. A high-ranking noble or a victorious warrior who amassed vast resources through raids, military compensation, or liberating a prominent Muslim leader might experience glory. He would return as a revered figure, his honor restored, past missteps pardoned, and his vaults bursting with Byzantine gold, rare fabrics, and imported luxuries. He could channel this newfound wealth into expanding his fortress, funding a new place of worship, or enhancing his political power. He represented the tangible fulfillment of the Crusades' aspirations. For the typical soldier, the homecoming was rarely triumphant. He might arrive with minimal silver, a Saracen blade as a keepsake, and timeless tales, yet devoid of significant gains. He had traversed distant lands, yet reclaimed the identical modest hamlet and unchanging hardship he once departed. He had transformed, yet the world around him stayed the same. Numerous survivors reached home without wealth but burdened by wounds, visible and unseen. They returned impaired, lacking limbs or marked by grievous injuries. They arrived debilitated by cryptic, prolonged ailments from the East that European physicians baffled. And they returned oppressed by incomprehensible events they endured and committed. The raw truth of combat, the slaughter, and the unrelenting struggle of the expedition. Among them were those who never intended to return. Many were younger sons who forged new lives in Outremer, creating lasting lineages. Others were men who, after extended stays in the East, felt estranged from their homeland's harsh climate. They embraced local customs, favoring the climate, traditions, and daily existence of the Crusader provinces. They became lifelong residents, dying in the land they once aimed to subjugate, their remains resting beneath the faith's emblem they left behind.